Hello everyone, welcome back to class. So for this series of videos for Friday the 25th, we're going to go over the nervous system. Now the nervous system is made up of different types of neurons as well as different parts of the nervous system. So we're going to go over what all of that is. And then next week we'll go over specifically the brain. So there's three types of neurons that make up the nervous system. We have sensory neurons, which are the neurons that carry input messages from the organs to the spinal cord and the brain. So these are the sense organs, so you can think of them as any type of sense. So sight, smell, taste, touch, hear, any of those senses, then that information is being taken from those sense organs to the brain via sensory neurons. The second type of neuron is a motor neuron. Now, motor neurons send information from the brain and the spinal cord to the muscles and organs. So motor neurons tell the body to move. The third type are interneurons. Now, interneurons are kind of interesting because they're kind of a relay station between the sensory and motor neurons and the spinal cord and brain. So they perform these connective or associative functions within the nervous system. And there's actually more interneurons than any other type of neuron. So they're very important. Now here's just an image kind of showing how all these different types of neurons play together. So what we have here is the spinal cord, just a section. And in green here we have this interneuron. In red then we have a motor neuron. And then in blue, we have a sensory neuron. So what you can see is we're talking about the sense of touch here. So in your finger, there's some sensory organelles. We'll talk about that in later chapters. But here, then it's feeling the heat of a flame. So your sensory neurons are going to send that information up into the spinal cord. That information's then going to be sent via interneuron to the motor neuron, which is going to tell your muscle to contract, therefore pulling your finger away from the heat. So that's like a reflex. So you can see how sensory neurons is incoming information, motor neuron is outgoing information, and then you have the interneurons in the middle that play a role and kind of connect the two so that they can communicate. Now, the nervous system itself has a very complicated structure. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the peripheral nervous system. So the two big categories of the nervous system is the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system, which is everything else. So that would be all those sensory neurons. Those would be some of the interneurons. That would be the motor neurons, all that kind of thing. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about this green part, the peripheral nervous system, and how that breaks down. Now this slide is very helpful for when you study, so I really suggest that you be able to kind of recognize the slide and use the slide a lot when you're studying. It's very important. So like I said, we're going to start with the peripheral nervous system, also called the PNS. So the peripheral nervous system is first split into two sections. So if we look back, we have the somatic system and the autonomic system. Okay, so the somatic system is voluntary muscle activation, and autonomic is kind of involuntary type of stuff. So that'd be like with the flame example, pulling your finger away, your hand away because something's hot. You don't really control that. That's more of a reflex. So again, we're going to start with talking about the difference between these two. So first, the somatic nervous system is made up of both sensory and motor neurons. They're grouped together to form sensory and motor nerves. And inside the brain, the nerves are called tracts. In the peripheral nervous system, you can think of them as tracts, but we usually just call them nerves. So when we're talking about a nerve, like you struck a nerve, then you're talking about a combination of a sensory and motor neuron that work together. So again, you have bringing information from the sensory receptors to then send the information to the muscles. So it's a very collaborative result. So opposite of the somatic nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. So think of like an automatic door type thing. You know, it just works. You don't have to put in the effort. You don't have to consciously do it. And so what this does is it regulates the internal environment. So this is involved in functions such as respiration, circulation, and digestion. All of these things involve muscle contraction, muscle relaxation, but you don't have to consciously think about it. And that's due to this autonomic nervous system. So aspects of motivation, emotional behavior, and stress responses are also controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So again, you don't have to think about, I wish I was motivated or I wish I was stressed right now. Or like, I'm going to make myself stressed. You don't have to think about that. It just happens automatically. So the autonomic nervous system is actually split into two more sections. So if we look here, the somatic system is just by itself. It's voluntary and it's done. The autonomic nervous system is split into two more sections, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So if we talk about the sympathetic nervous system first, then the sympathetic nervous system is activation or arousal function. It tends to act as a total unit, which means a whole body system. And really, I want you to think of this as fight or flight, okay? So the sympathetic nervous system is when you're kind of worked up. Whether you're scared, you're excited, pretty much anything different from your resting state, that's your sympathetic nervous system, okay? Now, opposite of that is the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is more at rest. So processes in the body tend to slow down, and this is what we call the feed and breathe system. So it's more of a brake pedal, whereas the sympathetic nervous system is more of a gas pedal. So together, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems work together to achieve homeostasis. So homeostasis is just a delicate balance to maintain a constant internal state. So for this, think about body temperature, heart rate, pH, that kind of thing. Now, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems work on the same organs, the same part of the body, but they do different things. So what I want you to know is exactly what some of the effects are on the body. So starting in the head, so we're going to start top of the body and work our way down. In the sympathetic nervous system on the right, so remember sympathetic is the fight or flight, your pupils are going to dilate. And what this does is it enhances vision. You get more light into your pupils, so you can see better usually. Now the opposite of that is parasympathetic. Your pupils will contract because you don't need to have that enhanced vision when you're just at rest, when you're relaxing. In the sympathetic, so when you're in a fight, then your lungs, you're going to want more air in your lungs. So what that does is it causes the bronchi in your lungs to relax. In other words, that allows for more air to enter the lungs, which then means you get more oxygen into the blood. And so this will really help when you're running away. This is why sometimes people start to breathe heavier, maybe start to pant a bit when they get scared, that kind of thing, because you now have more surface area in your lungs that you need to fill up with oxygen. Your heartbeat itself will accelerate. It'll be stronger. Again, this is for the purpose of increasing oxygen. Again, so that now that you have more oxygen in your lungs, you can now pump that oxygenated blood across your body more efficiently, so you're able to run longer, run farther. Really think of this as if you're being chased by a bear. You want to be able to see while running through the woods. You need to breathe better because you're running. You need your heart to pump. Another thing it does is it inhibits your digestion. And that's because when you're running away from a bear, you don't have time to stop and take a poop. It's really as simple as that. You don't have time for that. So your body's just going to shut down this activity of the stomach, of the intestines, because all the blood that's usually involved in digestion is needed elsewhere. It's needed in the muscles so you can run away. And then the final thing is that your blood vessels will contract. And what this does is it increases your blood pressure, which again helps increase blood flow across the body, which is increasing the amount of oxygen your muscles are getting, again, to help you run away from that bear. Now, of course, the opposite is once you've, gotten to your cabin, your car, whatever, and you can now relax, you don't need to be able to see as well because you're just, you're safe. So your pupils will contract. Your bronchi will contract as well because you don't need as much oxygen at a resting state. You don't need to breathe as heavy, so your breathing will start to slow back down. Your heartbeat will slow back down again because you don't need the blood to flow as fast. Finally, your digestive system will start to activate. So, you wouldn't have had to go to the bathroom while you're running away, but then as you relax, you probably, you might suddenly need to go, and that's because your stomach and intestines are activated again. And then finally, your blood vessels will dilate again, which will decrease the blood pressure, help you relax, and that kind of thing. So you can see how all of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems act on very similar systems. However, they do the opposite things, and it's because one's for when you're being chased by a predator, and one's for when you're in a relaxed state. Now remember, the sympathetic nervous system will also activate for other things, like if you're really excited about something. Sometimes if you're just nervous, then it'll activate the sympathetic nervous system. Even though, you don't necessarily need all of this when you're just nervous, like if you have anxiety or something. But these are the physical symptoms of anxiety that we see. And again, that's because of overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. So after the peripheral nervous system, so the PNS, we just covered all of that. The opposite of that is the central nervous system. Now, the central nervous system is broken into two main parts, the brain and the spinal cord. So we're just going to go over this quickly, And then on Monday, I'm going to talk about more specifically all the areas in the brain. So again, the central nervous system is made up of the spinal cord and the brain. The spinal cord, you're not going to need to know too much about it in this class, but know that it is part of the central nervous system. It's pretty much the tail of the brain, so you can think of it as part of the brain. And its job is really to connect the peripheral nervous system with the brain. So all of those tracks from the somatic nervous system, as well as information about the autonomic nervous system, information will come from those sensory neurons into the spinal cord, and sometimes in the spinal cord will kind of make the decisions using those interneurons, and it will tell the motor neurons to move, kind of making decisions by itself. And then sometimes it's going to send information from those sensory neurons straight up to the brain, or it will receive information from the brain that it will then send to motor neurons. So it's kind of a relay station, kind of co-commander of the brain. It can make small decisions, but for the big decisions, it really needs the brain. So the spinal cord is pretty long. It's 40 to 45 centimeters long. Pretty much goes from the base of your head to your tailbone. And it is about 2.5 centimeters wide, so it's not too big, but it is also, it's pretty significant. So again, here's the same image that we saw before with the brain, with the spinal cord. And so spinal reflexes, these are those decisions that the spinal cord kind of makes by itself, that it's able to do. And so the spinal reflexes are simple stimulus response sequences. So really just what we think of as a reflex. And it's triggered at the level of the spinal cord, which means that there is no brain involvement. So in this example where you have your hand or your finger over a hot surface, the spinal cord doesn't need to waste time asking the brain what to do. It can make that decision real quick to pull your hand away to avoid the pain. So this is something that's we call a spinal reflex, because it's there's no brain involvement. Now, the other major part of the central nervous system is the brain. The brain is pretty much a 3-pound universe. An adult brain's about 3 pounds of just pure protein, fat, and fluid that kind of makes up who you are. It's weird, it's complex, and we're still trying to figure out how. So I like to picture it as kind of a gray cauliflower looking thing. It has a substance more like jelly or jello, and it just kind of floats around in your brain surrounded by fluid. It's made up of several complex structures that demand a huge amount of bodily resources that we're going to talk about next week. So on Monday, we're going to cover how to look at the brain, to orient yourself, as well as the different parts of the brain that make up different functions of the brain and who you are.